The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, a two-island Caribbean nation of a little over 1 million people, is about the size of the smallest U.S. state, Rhode Island. It's the southernmost of the Caribbean islands, just 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela, which is in northern South America. Trinidad was first a colony of Spain and then of England, gaining its independence in 1962. Over the years, there has also been some social and cultural influence from French planters and settlers, from Arawak Indians, people of African heritage, and those from India, China, the Middle East, Portugal, and North America. The religion of most of the people is Catholic and Anglican, but there is a large percentage of Hindus and some Muslims. Officially, between 40 and 45% of Trinidad and Tobago citizens are of African heritage. About the same reflect the heritage of India. 14% are of mixed racial and ethnic background, and 1% is white. But these official figures seem to underestimate the blendings in the backgrounds of Trinidadians. Out of this diversity of backgrounds, Trinidad and Tobago's people have developed a unique culture, a sense of being Trinidadian, a complex mix of ways of seeing the world, of thinking, feeling, speaking, and in general living that they have developed from living together on the same small islands for generations. Steelband drums and music were developed in the poorer sections of Trinidad's capital city, Port of Spain, by young men of African heritage with little formal education. Very often, people in these circumstances are quite creative in the use of whatever is affordable and at hand to express and develop their musical interests and talents, and that is just what happened in Trinidad. Steelband's invention and development was a reaction to the suppression of African and Indian drumming by the dominant economic, government, and social leaders of the colonial society. Pan music, as it's known in Trinidad, has been called the heartbeat of the nation. It is indeed part of the lifeblood of this small nation, which has been blessed with talented people far out of proportion to its size. Pan music today is a source of pride to Trinidadians and other West Indians of all races and classes. Few Trinidadians, or many others for that matter, can remain standing still when they hear the captivating, pulsating rhythms of a steel band beating out a calypso song. This unique and fascinating form of musical expression is painstakingly and lovingly created by beating with sticks on drums skillfully crafted from 55-gallon oil or chemical containers made of metal. And the music is usually played by ear. Pan maker and tuner Tony Slater tells us how a steel drum is made.
First, you have to be sure that you have a proper face then. The piece of steel that you're using to sink, you have to make sure then that you have a good piece of steel then, according to the instrument you're making.
He stresses the importance of carefully choosing a good piece of steel, the quality determined by the type of drum you're making. For the small, narrow tenor pan, the steel has to be strong or it will crack after you sink it to a certain depth. You start sinking, hammering down the top, bit by bit, about 2 inches from the rim, seeking the shape of a cone with 3 stages or depths to accommodate the different notes, up to 32 on a tenor pan. You stretch the metal and listen for the different sounds because if you're an experienced tuner, it will start to sing to you and you'll know when it's tight enough to start marking in your notes. You hammer groove the notes in, then take out the slack with more beating and cut the pan down to its proper size depending on the pitch of the drum you're making. You put it into a fire and may also seize the metal to give it more tension by throwing water on it while it's in the fire. Then you pre-tune it and send it to be chromed, after which it gets the final tuning. The arrival on the scene of the steel drum, a definite first for Trinidad and Tobago in the world, was the culmination of years of accidental discovery and careful experimentation. The drumming tradition among both Afro and Indo-Trinidadians has a long history and has played a vital role in both religious and social observances. When drumming is so basic a part of one's religion and social life, then people have a need for the drums and drumming for their very existence, to properly locate, observe, and celebrate their place in the world and their relationship to their gods, ancestors, or fellow human beings. But East Indian and African Trinidadians did not have any power or control over this important aspect of their lives in colonial Trinidad. The police and government did their best to suppress drumming. They feared and disliked it, believed it to be unchristian, and that the dancing which sometimes accompanied it was sinful. They also feared its use as a means of communication and potential unity among both black and Indian people. To maintain their positions of superior power, the white and often also the brown-skinned people constantly devalued, denounced, and suppressed anything that was African or Indian. A law of 1883 tried to eliminate dancing, drumming, and other music making by the masses by punishing the owners of dwellings which allowed such activity. Between 1881 and 1891, there were several violent clashes between the police and the people over the use of drums. In one of these, involving Muslim Indians using drums in their Hussein religious observance, over 100 people were injured and 13 were killed. Because drumming was so vital to most of Trinidad's citizens, it continued underground, but it didn't flourish, and people had to find alternative ways to express themselves musically, particularly at the annual carnival celebrations held just before Ash Wednesday. What eventually developed and was used from the early 1900s was the tambour bamboo band. The instruments were made from bamboo sticks of different lengths, partially or completely hollowed out, which were struck against each other with sticks or against the ground to produce sounds of varying pitch. Players beat bottles with spoons to get the higher-pitched sounds. Artist Patrick Chufoon recalls this early music.
Long before even Steelband came out, I remember seeing the bandsmen thumping bamboos on this raw pitch, the asphalt on the street. I can see it because I used to stand from the top of my father's shop front and look down into the street and see all the going-ons of early carnival. But I remember the songs. It's, maybe this is where the African influence come in, because it was a thumping, you know, thumping of the drums. The fellas had a twitch, like, and it keep twitching and rattling between two sticks, and you know, all the fanciful beating. And I remember that well. But they also had drums, some skin drums, but also boomed like this is the early beginnings of a steel band.
According to old-time Calypsonian Roaring Lion, who is a historian of Trinidad's music and carnival, people in Trinidad had been beating on metal and tin for some years.
Long ago, and to some extent, up to now, the children of this land used to get together on Good Friday and make what was known to everyone, young and old, the effigy of Judas. Sometime between 1 and 2 p.m. on that day, the children in the neighborhood would collect all the old cooking utensils, empty milk tins, pieces of iron, pitch oil tin, and of course, the garbage pans or dustbin in the district would naturally be borrowed for the occasion. With the necessary musical instruments in their possession, they would march back and forth through the district, beating their pans while they sang, "Boboli, boboli, beat the boboli, 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 beat the boboli," and the rhythm of that pan is identical with what is now known as the steel band, even up to the middle 40s. That is, before they started to discover notes and the production of bits and pieces of melody. With the passage of time, about 1919, the music of the Boboli band caught on with the adults, and the result was that it found its way into the carnival and became the main feature of a certain carnival band at the time. Beating of the bad behavior pan was identical with that of the Boboli band. Most of these very sailors were born and grew up in the slums. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that at one time or another, as children, they took part in the Boboli Band celebration on Good Friday. But about 1930, a fair number of masqueraders from East Dry River areas, such as behind the bridge, St. Joseph Road, Laventille, Rose Hill, and George Street, Port of Spain, all slum areas also became interested in the noisy beating of these crude discarded utensils. About 90% of these newly made members were not members of any sailor band, but they were disciples and active members of the then famous Bamboo Tambo band, the music of the calendar. And a few of them were members of a carnival band called Red Dragon from George Street, Port of Spain. On Carnival morning, they used to come out with one of the largest bamboo band from George Street, David Leach Yard. David Leach, a stick player, was the leader of the band. And whilst parading on the streets, those who had no tambu bamboo instrument would pick up garbage pans, covers, pieces of steel from the smith shop in George Street, and any cooking utensil they can find and proceed to beat it in time with the rhythm of the tambu bamboo. Thus, the tambu bamboo and the boboli, or bad behavior pan band, had joined forces and was in unison, at least on Carnival Monday mornings.
The exact date of the creation of the first steel drum is uncertain. There are several different versions about when, who, or even what event or refinement constitutes the invention of the steel drum. Oscar Pyle, pioneer steel bandsman and the organizer and leader for many years of the Casablanca Steel Band, gives us one version.
Way back in 1935, we had the tambu bamboo, and playing on the road, by an accident, one of the leading men, which was Ford, who was playing one of the bamboos, that bamboo happened to break. And in the excitement and the heat of it, wanted something to beat. He then ran across the road and take up a dustbin cover. And by beating the dustbin cover, they found out really the dustbin cover had a more stinging and more rhythm song than the bamboo just knocking on the ground. And from then on, that particular band, which band he was playing from Newtown, Alexander Ragtime Band, they then went back a couple weeks or months after, and they started looking for pans, you know, old pin pans and so on, and getting a more genuine song than the bamboo. Whilst they was at that, Gonzales, which was way up in East Dry River, went and start making pans and getting pans, old disregarded bins, biscuit drums, gasoline tanks, and so on. And this was the birth of the steel bands.
The crucial point in the transition from bamboo to steel is probably when different notes were added to the metal drums and melodies could be played on them. Emerging from the several different versions of the creation of the steel drum, there is consensus that the first pan with notes was created in the mid-1930s, evidently by accident, and that one of the first, if not the first person to add notes and play recognizable songs was the late Winston Spree Simon. Here is his version of how notes were added to the crude pans.
And I had lent this drum, or loaned this drum, and on coming back to retrieve my drum, the face of the drum was beaten in so badly that it had taken on a concave appearance. Now I just took the drum from him and I went on the side of the road and trying was to get back the face to its normal surface. By prodding on the inside with a stone and a stick, I found by hitting on the different areas of the inside surface, I was able to discover 4 distinct musical notes, which enabled me to play something of a bugle called pom 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 pom. And therefore I played at that moment tom 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 tom.
Spree Simon is hailed by many as the father of steel band music. Whatever the case, he was a very talented pioneer in the development of steel band music, who in 1946 presented the first solo pan concert, playing selections ranging from calypsos to the classics. It was a landmark in the progress and acceptance of steel band music, as it was a Carnival Sunday concert, well attended and well received by an audience which included Trinidad's governor. Young people who believe they have little opportunity for recognition, success, and self-fulfillment in the customary areas of achievement in society, a good education, a good job, or career, often channel their energies and talents into other areas, those which are available to them. They choose other and sometimes marginal or deviant role models and self-images. Some of the steel band's men and women and their followers saw themselves and were seen by others as hooligans, bad Johns in Trinidad talk, and they took many of their cues from American war, gangster, and Western movies. Anthony Prospect, musical director of the Iscot Casablanca Steel Band, sums it up.
You see, what was responsible for the violence and so on, you see, it was for lack, for frustration that I think caused every, you know, the whole thing. People, no education, poor housing, lack of recreational facilities, and all these things. So all these young lads had to do was to gather around corners and in night beat pans and so on, and they had to release all this energy some way or other.
Oscar Pyle tells us how he chose the name Casablanca for his band.
The name Casablanca really came from a motion picture, which was starred with Humphrey Bogart, as you know, within that time.
Right.
That was the pre-war. So we choose to call the band Casablanca, because within that time, well, they used to call me Humphrey Bogart.
Pat Chufoon recalls the violence in the early steel band era.
Those are the days when you used to see a lot of these films with Back to Baton, with Robert Taylor and all the Audie Murphy and all this sort of damn strippiness. Inspired the moviegoer, and these poor fellas, some of them just lived in the cinemas in those days. After seeing a good war picture, they want to do the same thing. And this is what caused a lot of the things with the steel band clashing in those periods. It was like a game. You see fellas will go up and say, oh, look, we're going up to beat Casablanca tonight. Invaders, we're going to beat the invaders. If you hear all the names are, all war names. Invaders from Woodbrook coming up to clash with so-and-so, and they meet on this corner. Men used to walk with razors in their waist.
Here is Trinidadian Errol Hill, playwright, actor, author, and Dartmouth College professor.
The gangs of the boys were, of course, related to different districts and were in fierce competition with rival bands. They would steal their pans. They would fight them for their girlfriends. They would clash with them on the street during carnival time. The element of competition, contest, rivalry, which band is better than which, who plays best, who is the leading ping pong player, etc., the ping pong being the leading pan, this generated a considerable amount of fierce rivalry, leading to fighting, knifing, and, I regret to say, killing between the members of the various bands.
Carlton Constantine, nicknamed Ziggly, one of the pioneers of steel band and the founder of the Bar 20 band, explains how trouble with the police often developed.
Well, the clashes on the road, well, so much different things could have caused a noise. A woman from one band, she has a man from one band, and probably she the next guy from the next band. Well, that's one of the factors. Then again, the band playing, well, this band playing this tune, this one to say this next one playing this, take his tune. In a dance where drinks is concerned, anything, because, I mean, that was the era, you know, violence was very high, you know, at that era.
Curtis Pierre, founder and leader of the Dixieland Steel Band in the 1950s, recalls his personal experience in a steel band clash.
There was a certain amount of tough rivalry, which there is in any type of group activity. For no other reason than, you know, you just want to be king of the rock. And, you know, guys said that you're from Belmont and you should not be walking in Woodbrook. It had nothing to do with the quality of your music. It had nothing to do with, you know, whether you had their girls. My experience in 1953, we had a clash with a band called Ebonite. It was not anything that they knew who we were or we knew who they were. Some little incident sparked it off, and it got real messy. You know, guys were swinging baseball bats. I got hit with a baseball bat. Lucky nobody was holding it at the time. Somebody just flung it across. One guy next to me got his cheek cut open with a razor. That was the scariest part. He just saw the flesh part, and he saw the teeth. And a couple of minutes after, the blood. One guy came charging at me with what looked like a piece of a kitchen fork, a large kitchen fork. And all I could do was raise the tenor pan I had and hit him across the bridge of his nose. And that I remember also seeing the bone just go white. And the guy's eyes closed and he flaked out and I disappeared.
The result of all this was great hostility and severe repression between police and pan men and women.
So the police hounded these bands, literally. They would have raids on the band's headquarters and pick up the men. And it seemed, after a period of years, that there was no end to this. The hostility between the police, the forces of law and order, on the one hand, the middle class on the other, and opposed to these two were the pan men, as they got to be called.
Steel band music, then, its players and followers, were not very well received by the more influential and powerful members of their society. Gradually, in the 1950s and 60s, this changed, as did the behavior of the steel band's men, due to several factors. First, financial sponsorship by businesses and the moral support, status, and guidance that accompanied sponsorship. Casablanca, for example, is now sponsored by the Iron and Steel Company of Trinidad and Tobago, Renegades by the Amoco Trinidad Oil Company. George Yates, leader for many years of Desperados, explains.
Well, West Indian Tobacco came along and they didn't have a steel band and they wanted Desperados, and at all costs they'd have paid anything to get Desperados. Well, I got a nice little budget of 11,000 for them at that time, and from then onwards, this is where I can say that Desperados has been the trendsetters in the steel band, setting the pace for good behavior in the steel band movement, because they no longer had cause to fight. They were more interested. If any time the idea or the concept, they're thinking in terms of, well, they will lose their sponsorship. So that sort of held them, you know. And then I wasn't the violent type.
A second factor was the gradual involvement of more educated, lighter-skinned, and white people in the bands, often against the wishes of their parents, relatives, and friends. Curtis Pierre tells us what he thinks brought about greater acceptance of steel bands.
I really don't know what we did, but up to recently, a guy says, you fellas made a breakthrough. You guys don't realize what you did. That you fought society and you said, we're going to make this thing great.
Pan player, composer, and arranger Ray Holman, a school teacher, seems to support this view.
Well, the change came about when people, well, say like myself, who might have had the benefit of a secondary school education and so, began to come into the bands, you know. So people began, the public at large, and began to look at it a little differently.
A third factor is the support of several key, respected, influential members of the society who took the unpopular stand in favor of steel band music and bands. Politician, writer, and patron of the arts Albert Gomes. Religious leader Canaan Farquhar, shown here at the head of the table. Lawyer, musician, and secretary of the Youth Council, Mr. Lennox Pierre, left center. And Beryl McBurney, dancer, choreographer, and founder of the Little Carib Theater, who brought the Invader Steel Band into her theater for a performance in 1948. She also got Ray Holman involved in steel band music.
In my mind, she played an important part too in the steel, getting the steel band to be more socially acceptable. Because, for example, it was through her that I really started to play pan.
A 1949 Commission of Inquiry into the steel band movement recommended that a steel band association be formed And this was done, another important factor in the greater acceptance of the music and the players. Steel band music and musicians were more well received when they demonstrated that they could play the challenging and complex classical, or what they called European music. It is not unique to Trinidad and Tobago, but a general phenomenon that many colonized people develop negative attitudes toward their own cultural heritage and give more respect to that of their colonial rulers. When the People's National Movement Party, headed by the late Dr. Eric Williams, came to power in 1956, supported largely by Afro-Trinidadians, there was active and open support of local culture, much of which had been either legally banned, ignored, or socially snubbed in the past. The 1970 Black Power movement in Trinidad created more black pride and consciousness and acceptance of the African heritage. This seems to have generated more interest in and acceptance of drumming in general, and to have brought about greater acceptance of steel drums in a variety of settings, social, educational, and religious. Another factor in the gradual but still incomplete acceptance of steel band music was the involvement of bands in organized music competitions. But again, special weight was given to those with foreign judges. Their opinions were more highly regarded than those of local people. Women have long been actively involved with steel bands, and in 1951, Hazel Henley started the Girl Pat Steel Orchestra. Steel band music has influenced the other arts. Literature, represented by Earl Lovelace's novel, The Dragon Can't Dance. Paintings by Trinidad and Tobago's artists. Sculpture, as in this steel band memorial in Port of Spain by Pat Chufun. Drama, as in The Ping Pong by Errol Hill. And dramatic readings and poetry. Steel band music has spread far and wide and been very well received. In 1951, the Trinidad All-Steel Percussion Orchestra, led by musical director Lieutenant Joseph Griffith, played in London at the Festival of Britain and in Paris. Now there are steel bands in Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., Montreal, Toronto, and many other cities. The United States Navy has a steel band which was organized with the help of Trinidadian Ellie Minette. Today in Trinidad and Tobago, steel bands even play in schools, in churches, and at funerals. The steel band movement continues in its long and difficult struggle, and many people have made important contributions. Deserving of special mention are Spree Simon, Ellie Minette for innovations in making and tuning pans, Neville Jules for innovations in the bass pan, and Anthony Williams for developments in tuning. Let's listen now to a portion of the 1812 overture played by the award-winning Iscot Casablanca Steel Orchestra and a calypso entitled Rebecca by the Catelli Trinidad All-Stars.